Welcome to Achieving Success with Olivia Atkin. I'm your host, Olivia Atkin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We give you real-life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top-notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Mark Fisher. Mark is a financial advisor at Fisher Financial Management. FFM helps with all aspects of financial planning, including retirement saving plans, life insurance, bonds, alternative investments, and more. You can find Mark by going to his website, fisherwealthmgt.com, or by emailing him at mark.j.fisher@lpl.com. Hello, Mark. It's fantastic having you on the show.
Thank you, Olivia. I'm looking forward to it.
To start off the show, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Mark Fisher?
What success means and looks like. Uh, it means achieving your goals, always having a goal. I tell people, younger guys I talk to today, I'm like, your goal could be a house, it could be a vacation, it could be a car, but it has to be a personal goal. So you have a drive, something that's going to get you to where you need to be, both professionally and personally. I'm unique. I'm independent advisor, so I work for myself. I use LPL Financial as basically a springboard. They have all the options I need. They make sure I keep everything in order. But success, being with LPL is a sign of success because they're one of the largest independent firms out there, and I was asked to join them. They actually recruited me, so that was a nice boost to the ego. I'm not going to lie and just say it was. But again, that's what I see as success. When you've achieved something that other people are interested, like yourself, and want to hear more about it, I think that that's huge.
And that plays into something you and I have talked a lot about is sharing the knowledge and being able to be open and transparent with where your life has gone and the journey you're taking and the lessons you have learned along the way and the things that have impacted you to help others in a positive manner. And you do that very well. One thing you and I have talked about in the past is an interesting question, kind of like how I start off the show. I ask everyone what success means and looks like to them. You have an interesting question that you ask all your clients and people you talk to. What is that first question you ask them?
I've been doing this about 15 years. I ask how much is enough. And that means not exactly what people think it means. It means a number of things. It means what's your goal in life as far as what type of retirement do you want to live? How much money are you going to need to have that type of retirement? What are the investments that can help get you there? But then it also is, if you make, say, 20% in stock, are you happy taking your profit and moving on to something else? Do you want to stay with it? And if it goes to 100%, do you want to take some out? My rule is if it goes to 100%, you take your money off the table, and to make it as easy as possible, you leave the house's money, as if you're gambling, on the table and let it work for you. That has worked in the past and continues to work today. But everybody, I was in a room with 14 people recently, and no one could answer that question. All of us had a different situation in life, whether it's kids through college, that planning comes into effect. So you really have to think about how much enough is. And it does require budgeting. I always ask clients to give me a budget. And I try to provide income based off interest income only, not going into principal. I find going into principal is never a positive thing, especially when we see market fluctuation like we've seen these last few years. Because if you're relying on a big chunk of money to come out and the market's down 20%, you're taking out money at a 20% loss. And you don't want to be in that position. The best position to be in is the one I find myself in now, where interest rates are higher, finding higher income rates for my clients, and making the proper moves.
And it's all about what I love with the question that you bring up. And you even said this in your answer. It is sitting there and saying the answer is going to be different, but what does that mean to you right now? And what are your goals? And having those goals. And along with that comes a lot of perspective on what you've been through and how you see the world. Now, Mark, there are many aspects of your life that I want to dive in today because that really shapes how you advise others and the journey that you help others go on and are able to connect with them. I always say we all have unique journeys that make up who we are, and certainly you are no exception. That being said, I want to dive into it. You were a military brat. I think that's something that gives you a very unique perspective with people with experiences because not only were you a military brat and moved, but you were stationed in another country. You grew up for predominant amount of time in another country and then came back to the US to get your degree. So how has growing up in the military environment and being a military brat played a role in your outlook today and shape how you interact with people, how you engage, and just your overall experiences as that military brat being coming to adult and looking back at it as well.
Definitely been looking back on it a lot lately. Been reconnecting with people that I graduated high school with over 30 years ago. Um, what it did, and I was age 11 to 18 when I lived in Germany. And when I went there, the Berlin Wall was still up, Cold War was still in full effect. I went there in 1984. Um, Number of things happened, obviously, during that time. In '86, we had Chernobyl blow up. And unfortunately, based on documentaries I've seen now, I know that we were exposed to the radiation, but there was really nothing you could do about it, sadly. But being a military brat and being overseas and seeing how other countries, how other religions, how other races live their lives completely different than what we see in day to day small town America. And not that anything's wrong with small town America. It's just to give an example because I lived in a small town in Germany. But when you're an American living overseas, you have to kind of grow up a little faster, especially in the 80s. Sadly, there was a lot of terrorist attacks, planes, nightclubs. So we had to be aware if we went out, even if we went out with our parents, everybody had to be aware of where we were going and just pay attention. That was one of the biggest things that people taught us, commanders, teachers, my friends' parents, anybody. Pay attention to your surroundings, realize that you may not be the most popular person in the room, and always make an effort to learn the language. That's one thing I don't want to leave out of that. If you can just learn please and thank you, you're going to get over on people because just going in and expecting them to speak English, it's kind of rude. It's like people here thinking everybody should speak English. Well, it goes the same way if you go to another country. You need to help mesh with them. The other thing that benefited me was I lived on the economy. Now, what that means is I didn't live on the base. I went to school on the base, shopped on the base, played sports on the base, but I did not live there. I lived out in a small German town. And I'm just like we do here in the States, made friends with my neighbors, still friends with my neighbor today. Geez, almost 40 years later. And we still hang out. I just was in Germany and visited him recently, came here in April. It's a friendship that I really can't put into words. It's just like a brother. It's like we're brothers because I'm an only child and it feels that way because we know each other. But one of my friends, being military brat, said we're kind of like a fellowship because we've seen the world differently. Again, I mentioned Chernobyl, but in '86 we bombed Libya, and it took 5 hours to get to school that day. And I'm in, I think, eighth, ninth grade, and I'm on a school bus for 5 hours going through checkpoints where they're checking for bombs and full dog thing. And I don't even know why we went to school that day now that I think back on it. But that's what happens when there is a major event overseas and you're a military brat or child of a military personnel or government worker living overseas. Those things affect you more directly than they do here. Obviously, there's terrible things going on in the world. There seem always to be. But when you're on a base in Europe and people are saying negative things about the United States, it can get a little scary. I can tell you when the first Gulf War started, sadly it's first, I wish I didn't have to say first, but when the Gulf War started in '91, my mother woke me up crying at like 4 o'clock in the morning. And she said the bombs are dropping. And she had to go to work because her position, she was in charge of all the youth services. So she had to go open all the child care development centers. Uh, I'll never forget that. We didn't have school for 4 days. And then when we got on the bus, we had armed military police. When I say armed, I mean battle fatigues. I don't just mean a sidearm. I'm talking M16, grenade launcher. And then we had guards around the school, and all my friends' dads and moms were deployed. I was fortunate where my mother didn't get deployed, but I got to see what they went through as children, knowing that their parents are in a what we didn't know at the time, what would happen to them. They were in a war theater. It was not pretty, it was not fun. And you don't really understand that unless you sit there and experience it and see it in the eyes of the people that are worrying about their loved ones. And think about a military brat. My mother was also a military brat in 1960. That was when the Berlin Wall went up. It was 61 actually when it went up. And we were both there when it went down in 1989. I got to see my German friend's mother's family was separated by the Berlin Wall. Got to see them reunite. It was a wonderful thing. Got to see people loving life, enjoying themselves, traveling, because they never could do it. In 30 years, they were stuck. So that's another perspective to get is somebody's just stuck in one place with no options. People disappear, your mail's read, your calls are listened to. You just really don't understand it until you talk to somebody that lived it. And it's good.
I want to ask you a question from the perspective of a military brat now, grown up, have these life experiences, grew up in that environment, but you are an adult. You can value the experiences you want and those friendships that you had. What is a piece of advice or something you look back on now that you're thankful for due to being a military brat that, families that have young kids who are debating, okay, do I move with my spouse or do I stay home? Um, and what would that be like for them? A positive down the road or negative? What is looking back now something that you're grateful that your parents decided to take you to Germany and be one unit instead of being in two different locations?
I was actually still of two units. My mother and father were divorced when I was three. My mother met my stepfather in 1985 or 86. So I was always just my mother and I were the unit. And having that she lived there and wanted to take me back there, she felt safe there. Again, my grandfather was in the army, served in World War II in Korea, but she knew that it was something she enjoyed. And she was a teenager, a young teenager when she was there. And I was 11 at the time. I can't speak to if I would have been 5 or 6, but I would assume I would just go with her because I've seen what she did. She did childcare services. So they had everything. They had daycare for the kids and school. Everything's on an American level. Looking back as an adult, the one thing I kind of wish is that I consider going to German school because that was an option back then, but it wasn't as talked about as it is now. And when I was just there in December, I met a family and they had 7 kids. The guy was a chaplain. They had 7 kids, and 3 of them went to German school, and the other 4 went to American school. But all 7 of them started in German school and were fluent in the language. I got fairly good at the language. I wouldn't call myself 100% fluent. But when you leave Germany and you don't have anybody to speak it with, you kind of lose it. And it's not an easy language to learn in the first place. There's different dialects, different slangs, just like in Spanish and all the other. So you have to really try to fit in. And while I found that I fit in well in the economy, meeting German natural citizens and making friends, which again I still have today, I kind of wish I would have gone to German school. Not say anything about the education I got because I think I got a great education. It's just for the exposure to a different society, a different way of learning and teaching. That's something that I was always curious about.
And I want to bring up one last question about your time in Germany before we pivot a little bit. But you brought up this point of going back recently, and you had a nice trip there. I was seeing all the pictures, and I lived vicariously through you getting to see some of these different things. But being in an environment, no matter the age, when a war is going on, you see things and have memories of things one way. For example, my father was in Grenada when the invasion hit. And we recently, as a family, went back about 2 years ago to Grenada, and that was the first time he had been back since the invasion had hit. And things have changed over time, obviously, there, just like Germany. But a lot of those memories start to come back of what was happening around that time, during that time, you know, the experiences you had. And we actually were interesting enough to talk to some people who, were saved during that time and recalled it as well. And it was a very interesting experience too, because the way they looked at my father when he had mentioned he was there during that and experienced it with them brought a whole different respect of community, camaraderie, understanding, and then getting to explore it in the environment it is today. I remember so many different times he would be like, "That wasn't there," or "This is how we would do it then, and this is what it is now." So for you going back all these years later, seeing people having those different experiences, what was that like for you going back in this different capacity?
It's like going home again. I just have to say that because a lot of things on the base and off the base really hadn't changed. But the further out you go, the base has exploded in size. There's multiple schools where there used to be just an elementary school and you had to go to another base to go to high school. So they have multiple elementary schools, junior highs, and housing that was just never there before. It was all farm fields. So the base has really encompassed everything. And the one thing that when I saw everybody is just as concerned about world affairs as everyone else should be, but they're not letting it get in the way of their life. Just like when the Berlin Wall was there and the World War III at the time would have started 40 miles from where we lived. So you just live your life and you focus on what you need to do to live. And that's something that really hit me hard on this last trip was everybody was happy going to breakfast with my stepfather every morning. And we went up to the base and we really didn't go on the base other than to do laundry and check a few things. We stayed on the economy, saw old friends, went to Gasthouses, which are restaurants, and stayed with old friends. We really stayed away from the typical life on the base. We just wanted to immerse ourselves back into the German society, German culture. Being in Garmisch the first time, which is the painting behind me is from Garmisch from 1960. It was actually my grandmother's. And that's where my mother was a teenager. And it was very important for me to be there with him and to just all the things that I used to do there. The skiing, which she dropped me off to go do, that was all the same. But again, you are right, things have changed. But as a whole, I didn't feel like the German mentality had changed. While they don't sit in front of the news every day, they still just go out, walk, exercise, take their holidays. That was the reassuring thing to me is while, yeah, they're concerned about the world, but they're not letting it drive their life. They're not watching the news all the time. And that's something that I know we do too much of here, myself included, and I need to kind of get away from because that just kind of puts more fear on the plate than there should be. If you can understand that, you don't want to have people overthinking. But
Mhm.
people said, "Oh, the base is getting bigger. We're keeping a couple of towns in. If without us, I don't know what the towns would do financially. There's so much dependence on us. When they talked about pulling us out of Germany, you also have 30 to 50,000 troops, but you also have wife, possibly two kids. There's not enough housing to bring them back here and put them anywhere, and the bases just aren't equipped for it. So, yeah, we've got more modern. That's a definite change. But as far as the base itself, it still looks the same. Yes, they've expanded it, and that's where all the newer things are. But the old part still looks like it did. The gym I went to every weekend and played basketball for 6 hours, still there. Burger King, which I think I posted on Facebook, that opened when I was there, still there. Um, yeah, all that stuff. It's just wonderful. It is like going home again because I did spend 11 to 18 there, and those are formative years. And the rules in Germany are completely different. We were able to go out and go to bars and go to nightclubs, and again, we had to be careful, but we went out and enjoyed typical German life.
Mark, one thing I've heard you share throughout the different stories we've even talked about on the show today and the impact things have made is your mother quite a few times,
Mhm.
right? And your mother played a big role in your life and you had a very unique bond with her. Sadly, she passed away recently. And you and I have talked about now holding her memory and the importance of that for you, but also the things that you didn't necessarily pick up on in real time that now, once your parent has sadly passed away, you're picking up on things and looking at things a little differently. And I think before we go into what you do today, bringing up your mother and how she has shaped you even after a death is so important. So for you, what was it like? And I want to start with this point of losing a parent can be so difficult, no matter your age. What was it like for you losing your mother, who you were so close with, and going through that grieving process?
Fortunately, it wasn't the first time I almost lost her. I know I've told you the story. I don't want to put too much light on it. Don't want to give people still alive and in prison any type of acknowledgement. But we lived, I won't say what town we lived in, but we lived in a town in South Jersey. And when I was 9, my weekend with my dad, and she was in her 30s and did what every 30-year-old young woman wants to do. She went out. She had a good time. She came home, and there was a botched robbery on the front doorstep of our house, and she was stabbed and coded multiple times, nearly died. And I was just 9 years old. I had no idea what was going on. And I can remember going into the intensive care unit in the single room where they don't know if you're going to survive, everything she was hooked up to. She ended up with 47 staples holding her internal organs together, which I can't even fathom. Even as a child, I couldn't fathom it, nor as a teenager, nor as an adult. Some adults I talk to don't get it, don't understand. I'm like, you want to see an x ray? It looks like a zipper. But what really gets me now looking back is that it happened on our front doorstep and we couldn't just move away from there. You just couldn't leave. So she had to walk through that doorway until we eventually did move. And that's something that's really hit me hard is that her strength to, and this is when I learned more about PTSD, her strength to walk through that door that mostly triggered her PTSD, I'm certain, and not let it affect her and me is something that I'll never understand how she did it. It's not something sad I could talk to her about in the end because she had ALS. But on top of that thought process, when we went to Germany, it was just me and her. There was nobody. My grandparents were passed away. She has two sisters, but they're here. So we didn't go to Germany with backup. Like she never had a grandparent to come take care of me. She never had anybody local that she could call on. She had to really use the community. And when I was 11, that first 4 months we were there, she was in a horrible car accident and almost died again. And I'll never forget the military taking me in. I think I went through three military families, got to see her, got put on a plane back here to the States at Christmas to see my dad, my grandparents, his parents, and went back. And she was still in the hospital. And she was just going forward. She had a broken foot. She had crushed sternum, broken nose, still bruises on her face. She got that walking boot. And when school started again, she went right back to teaching. That's what she did at first. She taught gifted and talented. And she didn't stop. She just had her walking cane and never stopped going forward. And I didn't realize that I had PTSD from what happened to her because I felt guilt for not being there with her that night. But there's nothing I could have done to plan it, or nothing I really could have done if I was there. But she would have been home earlier, and you go through that. And I've been able to work that out. But it's motivating me now because when she got ALS, she said she was going to beat it. I didn't argue with her because she wasn't supposed to be here for 40 years of my life, and she was still here. And it's just one of those things. If anybody's going to beat it, you don't say anything. And in 3.5 years, she fought that terrible disease. losing something of herself every day, but she knew who I was up until the end. The one thing that I regret is not being able to give her peace when she wanted it the most. I think when you have a terminal disease, you should be allowed to get peace at some point. Go out with your own dignity. Like here in New Jersey, we can do hospice care. That doesn't exist in certain states in the United States. In fact, they have completely different views of it. So my stepfather has been amazing and is kind of like my new beacon that I'm following because he stayed with my mother for 3.5 years and never left the house and took care of her through the worst of the worst. And I can't thank him enough for that. There's nothing I'll ever be able to do to pay him back for that. But when I look back and realize I had PTSD when I was teen, I had PTSD in my 20s and into my 30s when I really started to recognize it and started to seek out help for it. And that's the one thing I don't want people to think help is not out there because there is help. And with the military these days, with all the suicides, it's horrible. I have friends that were in the military. They call me after a friend committed suicide and we talk about it. But they know that I'm there for them. And likewise with them, I think more people need to have that type of bond. But that type of bond as a military brat can't be replicated. It just can't be. That's the number one benefit to it. That back to a previous question where you said about a younger person, you learn to be more open, you learn to be more friendly. You certainly talk to strangers easier, but you also remember you're an American. We don't worry about politics when we're in the military because it just is what it is. You have to remember you're an American, and there's only 50,000 of us in this big country. And if something happens, we need to rely on each other. And that was where we get the fellowship that my one friend coined a few months back. It's a perfect way to describe what we are. We're not like a religion or a cult, but we're like a fellowship. And there's obviously a lot of pages online dedicated to it. But getting that exposure to the real world, not getting it piecemeal to me by newspapers or news channels, because we didn't have TV either. That's one thing. We had one channel, it was in German, and it didn't really show the news. So I didn't watch it. I also was too young to care. But you get this condition to where you're not afraid to go talk to strangers. I've never been afraid to go talk to a political person or a professional person or a famous person. Everybody's a person, so you just treat them that way. And most people like that better. They respect you for treating them normally, if that's possible. Because I think you also have met some people in your life where they really appreciate it when you just talk to them like a normal person. Don't
Mhm.
sugarcoat just because of their title or their achievements in life. You obviously respect them for that, but still talk to them like they're a human being, not a robot. That,
Exactly. And
yeah,
that's something that I think people end up respecting you a lot more when you take that shine away, like they're a shiny new penny, and you have to have the gloves on to even communicate. Um, because a lot of people in those scenarios get approached in a certain way all the time. They have to feel like they have to be on, and when you approach them a little differently, they get brought back to what other people communicate with all the time. They become real and have that sense of they can have that connection with you.
yeah.
I want to bring up, you had mentioned that your mom battled ALS the last 3 years of her life. For you, what was it like going from the child to more of that parent and caregiver? And what was that dynamic shift like for the both of you? Especially one thing your mom, through the stories you have shared, has really highlighted her strength. And whether it was through examples and teaching you, or passively just by leading by example. She had always demonstrated the strength she had, even at the end of saying, I'm going to beat ALS. I'm going to
Hmm.
beat it. It just goes to demonstrate the strength one can have and the mentality one can have, no matter whether it's just leading by example or by being upfront with something. But when it got down to that battle and the dynamics were shifting. What was that like for both of you?
Medically speaking, my mother was always a little bit stubborn about it sometimes because she was such a machine. And I say that complimentarily because she just used to go. And when I came back to the States, started my own life, and they eventually went back to Germany in 2005, my stepfather used to call me and say, "Tell your mother to go to the doctor," because she would listen to me. So that would be something I did. And we even talked about it recently. When First of all, when she got sick, COVID was in full swing, and it made it a lot more difficult getting to travel, getting to see her. Obviously, I drove down where they lived, and was it was hard. But I made the decision that I would be there as much as I could, even though some of the actual help that she needed, she didn't want me to do. My stepfather, I was there whenever he needed me to help him, and I offered to help every time. But when it came down to medical questions, taking medications, he relied on me to help him talk about it with her. And at one point, we did have to have a do not resuscitate order signed. And he waited until I got down there to talk to her about it. And we did it together as a three-person unit rather than him doing it without me. Even though I told him he could do it without me, he still respected our relationship that much that he wanted me to be involved. But it was extremely difficult to tell a woman who's never given up or never been beaten down, at least not shown that to me, to see her lose control of her body, control of her mind at times. And it was extremely difficult to be the person saying you should take this medicine, you should eat more, and eventually I knew she wouldn't be able to eat, she wouldn't be able to drink. But it was more difficult than the common cold or even cancer, sadly, which I've experienced with other family members. ALS is a huge, horrible animal. It just robs you of every possible good thing that you can do in your life. You can't get up and walk. You can't open your hands. Swallowing, as I said. So it became a little bit harder. I'm not going to say it was easy because I think saying it was easy would just not even fly. Because every day you live with could today be the day, especially in the last year. And she did pass in April of last year. But there was a time where I would be here for a month, work nonstop, go down there for 6 weeks, come back, work nonstop, work while I was down there, all the above. COVID did help with that a lot. My clients were also very kind and understanding because I've been with them through bad times in their lives. But the switching over to the parent part with health, with my mother wasn't. It's not as difficult as with my stepfather or my biological father. Both of them are a little bit more. How can I say it? They like to keep their health issues tight to the chest. When I'm sitting there going, I can help, but it's just who they are and how it goes.
One thing that you brought up in that story that you also do in your work environment and professionally is sitting down and having the hard conversations and that transparency as a unit. You have a lot of those conversations with your clients. For you, when you are building those relationships and having the longevity in the financial environment with the client, you need to have that unit understanding, everyone being on the same page. How do you go about having those conversations? And what should people keep in mind about thinking when they start thinking about financial planning overall?
What they should keep in mind, there when I ask the question, how much is enough, most people don't know it, and we have to work through it. That starts a good conversation with the clients. The difficult conversations are the when you're not here. And do you have a will? Do you have an estate plan? Do you have a living, uh, I believe they call it a power of attorney or a living will? And most people don't. Most people think if they get one, they're going to die. They get a will. I have had situations where people didn't want to get life insurance because they figured if I get it, I'm going to die. In some situations, getting it when they did was perfect. They were preferred health, everything was great. And 6 months later, they had prostate cancer and never would have got life insurance. So you just never know. And do I share stories without naming people? Obviously, I share what's relatable. But when you're sitting having that difficult long term discussion, I have had to tell people who were ultra conservative, if you keep going down this conservative route, I don't know if you're going to make it into retirement. You're going to have to learn to live off less. You're going to have to understand that when the market goes up 20%, you're not going to make 20%. You might make 8, 9. Is that enough for you? Again, how much is enough? But also when the market goes down, you don't go down as much. So there's give and take. Do I have people that can only handle certain types of investments and don't want to even take a risk? Absolutely. And do I adjust for them? I definitely do. But I also show them examples where if they got a little bit less conservative, they could make a little bit more. Obviously, if you're 5 years away from retirement, you need to get serious about it. If you haven't gotten serious about it, don't know what to tell you. Might not ever be able to retire. Had conversations with people that aren't going to be able to retire. I've said those words sadly to people, and that's just my honesty. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to string it along. I'm not going to have you buy into that we talked about dumb money, the movie earlier, where it talked about AMC and GameStop. Those were all just fads that came about because of internet chat rooms. There was no financial data to back that up. Both of those companies were in serious difficulty. GameStop, I can't believe, still had a stock trading. There's no earnings, no capital. It makes no sense. Um, in the '80s, you go to jail over that. If I was the one doing that, I'd go to jail. It's called front running. You're creating an interest in a stock that you're benefiting from either negatively or positively. So yeah, that's a little bit. That's where I get to the point where I always make sure I tell people you don't want to chase fads, don't want to go down the rabbit hole, because if you go down the rabbit hole, you could lose it all. And when Bitcoin first came out, it's not a registered asset. I can't sell it. So people ask me, and I tell them about it, and that's where it ends. But I don't go out there and search for it, and I don't try to sell it. If it were to be registered and be covered by the powers that be, then it changes. But it also changes the use of it and everything.
For you, there's such an importance, especially for a younger individual getting into learning about financial planning and why it's important, and even looking at stocks. I think showing examples of if you do this, this is what could potentially happen. If you do this, it makes it real. It makes it be able so you can comprehend things. I think people forget sometimes that when we don't know an area or it's not our expertise, sometimes it can make it harder to connect the dots. For you, especially when you're talking about, things you had just brought up, understanding what can actually be beneficial versus going down the rabbit hole and those teaching about stocks. What is something you really like to focus on or make sure you focus on with that young individual or someone, regardless of their age, just starting to think about their investments that they don't typically start thinking about?
The first thing I always mention to someone younger is have that emergency savings account. Have it be 3 months worth of your bills, 6 months if you really want to get creative with it, because you never know what's going to happen. I mean, obviously, COVID happened, and then there had to be a whole bunch of money sent out to stabilize people, stabilize banks, stabilize businesses. Nobody really prepared, but that was something that happens once every 100 years. The market used to sell off every 3.5 years. To have a 10 to 12 year bull market like we've had recently, that's never happened before. And I don't think it's ever going to happen again. I certainly don't understand how someone could think it's always going to go up, because it doesn't. Market goes up, market goes down. You want to buy low and sell high. Doesn't always work out that way. Sometimes you buy and stock goes down. I can remember buying Apple before the first iPhone came out. It was $84. It went to 55. I actually got yelled at by people. When I was saying buy more, they were upset that they were down. 30%. And I'm looking at them going, okay. And then it went up to 700 and they split, and it went up to 700 again and they split. So if you would have stayed in it, you'd have thousands of shares. And in one of my clients' cases, he has 2,000 shares. And that's $250,000, all because he ignored it. And that's why I always say to people, just put it in something that you can forget about. If you want to get creative and invest, say, in green technology, if that's what you're thinking about these days, we definitely have those stocks that we can buy, EVs and things like that. None of it is for certain, just like Apple really wasn't for certain back then. That's why people kind of freaked. And I think there's a little bit misconception that Apple's for certain today, because there are a lot of companies that don't exist today that used to exist that you just don't notice. Some of them still exist, but behind the scenes, they have a new marketing. Companies will always buy something, then they'll do it for the label. I remember when First Union bought the Wachovia Bank, they were doing it for Wachovia, the name. They weren't doing it to get the bank or change anything. So that's why it went in Philly. It went from the First Union Center to the Wachovia Center and now the Wells Fargo Center. So it's just all kind of been absorbed by these different banks. But in that particular case, it was just for the name change. They didn't change the way they did business. They had a bad name, a bad reputation. So just to change it up, they change the name. Sometimes it's that simple. But the other thing I tell people is, please don't get caught on, hey, my friends heard about this stock, it's worth $1 and I want to run with it. That's your gambling money. That's what you take to Vegas or Atlantic City or the online poker places today. And you play that money you're going to put in that. And if you lose it right away, that's pretty similar to what might or might not happen with the stock. I say might not happen because there are examples of Amazon. It was 45 cents one day back in the late 90s. But if you bought it then, yeah, you got 70 plus $1 million today. Again, that is a rarity. People, number one thing is patience. People don't have the patience to let the money work. I'm personally guilty of that sometimes. I get frustrated when things I think should be working don't work. And I recently had a stock that I was waiting on finally start to move in a positive direction, but it kind of sat and did nothing for almost 2 years. People didn't lose, but they didn't make anything. So you have to really educate people that there is no get rich quick scheme. It just doesn't exist. There's not one where you end up benefiting from it or getting rich. A lot of these companies like Apple, Microsoft, even Amazon started in somebody's garage. You just never know. But I do stay away from highly speculative stocks unless you're in your 30s and you can understand that this $2,000 we're going to put in stock XYZ, it could go to zero. Are you okay with losing that? And it could go to zero in a day. I might not even know it's going to zero to be able to sell it. And you have to be okay with it or I'm not going to buy it. And there's a long conversation about that. And if you do buy it and it goes down, I remind you, we had a long conversation about how that could happen. Not everybody likes to be reminded of that conversation, but it's the truth. You have to pay attention. But my job is to pay attention for you and read the news, try to read the tea leaves, as we say, try to read the earnings. But I always tell people again, if it's good enough for your medicine cabinet, good enough for your work computer, I'm on an Apple right now. So obviously it was good enough for my money to buy the product. I have an Apple phone, so I bought the product. It's good enough for your personal money. It's good enough for your investing money. Now, I did say Apple is struggling a bit right now, but that's due to what's happening in China and other things that would take longer to explain. But there's some risk there. Again, AI is big right now. So a lot of AI companies have been doing really well. So you just have to understand that you may get into something and it may go down right away, but the long-term plan is what you have to stick with. That's what I have clients that are 22, 23, 24 years with me, and they understand that staying in one place for a little while is more beneficial than panicking and moving.
And I think that's so important, and so many things you brought up today really connect and shape, again, how we make decisions, how we go through life experiences, and how we end up investing our money because it's really how we look at scenarios. Mark, how could people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you?
Like you said earlier, people can always contact me through my website at fisherwealthmgt.com or by my email at mark.j.fisher@lpl.com. Again, LPL is my broker dealer. They're huge. They have 3 locations, 3 centers, two on the East Coast, one on the West Coast. It's very, my website has got a lot of information. I was told recently by a 24-year-old that having the glossary on my website was huge because it tells you what a stock is, tells you what a bond is. It kind of starts your education just by perusing it and seeing, oh, well, if I click on this, what is this? So that's something that I really like people to do is try to get an idea, and then my bio's on there. They can understand where I've been, what I've been through, and then maybe learn a little bit and reach out and we can create a relationship.
Well, thank you, Mark, for all of your insight today.
Thank you very much, Olivia. I appreciate it.
Of course, it was truly my pleasure. You got vulnerable, you shared, you gave us so much knowledge and tidbits along the way. And a few of our key takeaways from today's conversation include: how much is enough? Continuously ask yourself that question. And it is not a, okay, if I answer this today, that's going to be the answer all the time. So continuously ask yourself, how much is enough? Whether that is money wise, investment wise, work environment, friendships, how much is enough? As well as learn the language in whatever environment you are in. Mark mentioned this with learning German when he was in Germany. But it is also, if you're in the financial industry, learning the financial lingo, learning the terms. If you're going into marketing, learn those marketing terms, healthcare, so that you can understand, and not just understand for your own knowledge, but understand it so that you can actually build relationships on these topics with individuals and immerse yourself in the culture, especially when you're talking about different countries. There's so much you can do when you take the time to learn someone else's culture and language, as well as focus on what you need to live. What do you need to do to survive? What is your play money? What is the things you can be doing instead of worrying about all these other facets that are going on? Mark mentioned that with his story of the television and how in Germany they're not focusing on the news and they're just living. It's really important to understand there are things going on in the world, not everything we can control.
Mhm.
However, if you focus on living, it eliminates part of that gap of regret down the line, and a lot more experiences can be had with it. As well as sometimes think about the stories and how those stories play a role in what we're doing, as well as don't go down the rabbit hole.
Mhm.
Mark mentioned this with stocks, and so many times someone will say to you, "Oh, I did this, you should go do it." Or you see this stock that's increasing pretty quickly and you go, "I'm going to do it." But the second you start going down the rabbit hole and making fast decisions that you're just like, "We'll see how it can play," it can really put you down a rabbit hole that you might not wanna be in. You look back 2 days later and you're like, "What did I just do?" Um
Yeah, yeah. That money goes away quickly when you're not paying attention. I
Exactly, as
saw.
well as have that emergency fund. A lot of
Yes.
time, we don't think about the fact that, especially in today's environment, in recent times, we saw so much happening and how it unfolded long term with the mass layoffs that
Mhm.
companies were having and different rounds of it. Have that emergency fund and build that into what you're doing every day and how you save your money, as well as have the patience to have the money work for you and have that money work in general. In today's society, so many things are those quick returns. But money, if you let it sit, you let it grow, and you let it work, there can be so many different positive outcomes from it. But you have to have the patience to understand and to let it work and play out. And lastly, if it is, and one of my favorites, might I add, is if it is good enough for your personal money, buy that product, like Mark had mentioned with Apple. It is good enough for your financial investment money. This was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Mark Fisher. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.